Courtney Armstrong, welcome back to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, it's really great to have you back. You were my guest way back in 2015 on episode number 461,
Wow.
which was about strategies for getting therapy clients unstuck.
Yes.
And I was so delighted with that interview and remembered you as being so lively and down to earth and full of good information that I looked back in my memory and said, where was that? Where was that interview? And I dug it up and found I could still knew how to contact you. And so voila, here we are. Once again. So what have you been up to in the past 6 years?
Oh, wow.
The short version.
I know, the short version. Well, so I think when you and I spoke, my first book, The Therapeutic Aha, had come out. And that book was all about my realization that what we're really up to in therapy is creating experiences for our clients. And there's a lot of different ways to get to those experiences. And I think you and Neil Gallagher recently talked about that on an interview. But then, my passion's always been trauma. And so after that book, more people were interested in me talking about how I apply some of those concepts in the therapeutic aha to trauma, and not just big T trauma, but attachment trauma and that complex trauma where someone has received so many experiences and messages that they're not lovable and, they can't trust people or trust life. Like, how do we get those people unstuck? Because they've just had so many discouraging experiences. It's hard for them to feel hopeful. And so that my most recent book is called Rethinking Trauma Treatment. And but that's what I've been up to, is really honing in on some techniques that we can use, but also just how we can use ourselves in a relationship with our clients to help them feel hope and to resolve the trauma in a way that causes them to feel, empowered and resilient.
Yeah. If somebody were to just see a little clip where you say, my passion is trauma, that might strike them as a little funny, but you are really, this is a passion in terms of the therapeutic work that you do and your writing.
Yeah.
And we might have to talk about that most recent book too at some point. But I think today's discussion about how you elicit positive emotional states in therapy is certainly related to that. And it's kind of in line with even when we going back to our other interview, how to get clients unstuck. I think that's probably part of that as well. So that's what we're going to be discussing, is how to awaken positive emotional states. And I hope that you'll feel free to throw in any case examples from your own practice as we go along.
Okay.
Because that always helps to ground it for people,
I agree.
And for me, I need it grounded.
Oh, me too. I learn more from a story as do our clients a lot of times.
Sure. Don't we all?
Natural.
Yeah. So part of our training as therapists is how to zoom in on the pain.
Right.
How to get the person to stop denying the pain and to get in touch with their pain and so on. And so here are you saying, well, how do we elicit positive states? Well, of course, we've got a whole approach called positive psychology. But I think what you're talking about might be different than that. So talk to us about the seeming paradox of needing to go into the pain and yet needing to evoke positive emotional states.
Yes, thank you, David. It is tricky, but once you get the hang of how to do it, I have found it it completely changed how I do therapy. And the initial inspiration for me learning how to do this was actually through hypnosis training, because in clinical hypnosis, we're taught to focus on possibilities and how to language things that draw somebody's mind towards what's desired. And so I've learned what we focus on, we amplify. So if you invite someone to focus on their pain, and there's value in that, but if we stay there without balancing it with some other experiences, they can get even more absorbed into it. And so what we know from state-based learning, or even studies in depression, is that when someone's in a negative emotional state, their mind tends to scan for anything similar. So they notice more the negative experiences around them. They notice more of the negative thoughts and memories. It becomes kind of their orientation. And so part of the challenge for us as therapists is to validate that while also inviting them to explore some other states, because we know from some research by a woman named Barbara Fredrickson, a psychologist at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, she developed what's called the Broaden and Build theory. And what she discovered is that people who flourish in life and seem to have resilience through adversity make an effort to also seek out moments of a positive emotional experience, not positive thinking, but they'll take a moment to, you know what, I'm going through a really hard time, but I'm just going to notice the sunset for a minute and just take that in.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to really just enjoy petting my cat right now, or I'm going to acknowledge that, wow, one person was kind to me, even if it was just somebody at the grocery store. But what she noticed is people who just spend 20 seconds taking in a positive experience were better able to cope and access other resources within themselves.
Yeah, I need to remember to do that. I used to do sort of a practice in bed at night, going to sleep, to review the day and try to remember something positive, or the positive things, or something, some compliment somebody gave me, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that is such a good practice. Also, you started out saying what you focus, I forget how you said it, what you focus on tends to be magnified, something like that.
That's right.
And it reminded me of I was into mountain biking when I was younger, and one of the things that they said was, don't look at the rock. Don't look at the rock, or you'll end up on the rock, if you're out there in a really rocky area. And I actually had a very forceful lesson in that, because I got stuck in a rut on a fire trail.
Yeah.
And the tire was in the rut, and there was a rock right there that I was headed to, and boom, I ended up right on the rock on my face. So that, for me, was a very concrete example of that principle, that what we focus on may bring it right in our face, so to speak.
That is a great metaphor. And I'm so sorry you had that experience, but I'm glad you were able to turn it into something.
Yeah, I'm over it now. It's been a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was something else that you said that I wanted to hook on to. I'm trying to remember what it was. But let's just jump back in. So when you talk about positive emotions, what are we talking about there? What kinds of emotions?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because this can be confusing for people, because what we're talking about is not just, don't worry, be happy. I mean, it's not a superficial thing. It's gratitude, for example. Appreciation for something can open that up, but also just inviting yourself to let yourself take in a moment of calm or beauty or a soothing experience. And or joy if it's accessible to you.
Yeah. I happen to believe that joy is accessible to us at any time if we just remember, if we can
No?
have the awareness to go to the joy and find it in ourselves. I actually developed what I thought was a meditation around that, around the birth of my twins. People have heard me tell this story so many times, but when my twins were born, I just and had these two little beings holding them on my breast, so to speak, in the rocking chair, and it pulled me into this sort of transcendental space. You're a mother, right?
I'm a stepmom
A
and
stepmom. Okay, so you
and
have
a
some idea
grandma
what
now. So I'm
okay, you got some idea what I'm talking about
I
here.
do.
Yeah, so what I realized later was that I could go to that same place if I
Yes.
just would visualize it and kind of put myself mentally back into that space, that I could evoke joy, and that I imagined it as volume control, and that I
Yeah.
could just turn up the volume control to the place where I couldn't handle it anymore.
Oh, yeah. I think that's such a beautiful moment. And I think that's exactly what sorry, I think my email just popped in. Sorry, guys.
Uh-oh. That's okay.
I'm just want to turn off the ding.
Yeah.
Okay, let me start over. um, I'm so glad that you're bringing up this moment with your twins, because that's exactly the kinds of moments we want people to be able to savor and take in. And
Hmm.
when you can spend, I think Rick Hansen says 20 seconds just intentionally
Yeah.
taking that in, it not only encodes it so that you can access it more easily when you need it to recall in a moment of stress, but also it really opens up your access to other areas of the brain.
Yeah. And I remember the part that I lost that I wanted to hook on. You mentioned positive thinking. And I believe you say that this is not positive thinking. What's the difference there between positive thinking and what we're talking about?
Thank you. The positive thinking, there's definitely, a place and a benefit to it. But you all know, I mean, when we're feeling really upset about something, it's very hard to just tell ourselves just to say, well, it's not that bad, or this is temporary. Like, even though we know it logically, the emotional part of your brain doesn't respond to words.
Right. That's the key thing there, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because we could have little things that we say to ourselves, which are maybe like band-aids, trying to put a
Yeah,
band-aid over the situation. But
yeah,
if it's not experienced emotionally,
right.
then it doesn't really imprint on that part of the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah, that really needs it.
Exactly. So, if you're able to tell yourself, okay, I want to remind myself, for example, this pandemic that we're in, like being isolated in our homes is hard, but it's temporary. Like, you could say that to yourself, but it still doesn't help. You would need to bring up an experience, a memory perhaps of something that you thought was never going to end and it ended, something to show that
Uh-huh.
part of your brain. Oh, it's like this,
I'm glad you brought up the pandemic. I was saving that for the end, but it's definitely a place that I want to go because
Yeah,
it's so with us,
right.
and people, a lot of people are suffering.
Very
But
much.
so I'm glad you've introduced it. Maybe we'll come back to it. I'm wondering
Yeah.
if you can think of a clinical example where you've, a case maybe that was a bit challenging and you were able to reorient someone and what the
Yeah.
consequences of that were.
Yes. So, one client that I'm thinking about, and I use imagery a lot. So when
Okay.
I'm trying to reach the emotional brain, the emotional part of our brain is also known as the subconscious, but it processes through the senses. So imagery, music, and movement are three of my go-tos to try to
Hmm.
elicit the desired response that I'm looking for, helping someone access. And so I had a client who'd been through a lot of childhood trauma, and it's during the pandemic. She and her husband are, home with each other a lot more. They're both working from home, and their marriage had been pretty good, but suddenly they were really arguing a lot and getting on each other's nerves. And then he said something to her that triggered just the same old feeling she hadn't had in a long time, where she felt unloved, unwanted, unworthy. And then she just started having all this anxiety about, maybe my husband doesn't really love me. And she knew logically. She said, Courtney, I know logically, because she told him this. She said, I feel like you don't love me anymore. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was just telling you, you're bugging me right now. And, but she was saying that's just so out of proportion, this anxiety I'm having now, and I'm vacillating between being really worried that he's going to leave me, and then this rage. How dare he talk to me like that? And we, tied it to some of her childhood experiences. I said, what is this bringing up for you? And of course, I was familiar with some of the old memories, and we hadn't fully processed the attachment piece of some of her trauma, where she felt this deep sense of not being wanted.
Yeah.
And so to help, and she was just boo-hooing and, that deep sobbing. And I wanted to validate that. And so I used the relationship to say to her what she probably needed to hear as a child. And I said, I know that really hurts. I know that's so unfair. Sometimes people say things that are really hurtful that they don't mean. It's confusing when someone you love can also say things that are mean. I said some things just trying to comfort her and validate. And then she goes, how do I get rid of this? And that was my cue. She's like, I'm tired of wallowing in this pain. And I said, can you think of a time where you felt unconditional love, that even if someone was getting on your nerves, that you still knew you loved them deep down? And even if they had this annoying part of them, you would still just do anything for them. She said, my grandmother. Immediately, my grandmother. I said, tell me about your grandmother. Yeah. So just in getting her to talk about her grandmother, her affects begins to shift. She gets more animated. She starts laughing, and she's like, well, my grandmother, she smoked, she drank, but she never abused me. And we would have the best time together. And she'd take me to go get junk food. And she had this old beat up Pinto car. And some of you may not remember the Ford Pinto, but it was like a hatchback, one of the first compact cars, and it had a lot of mechanical issues and stuff. But she said that Pinto would be broken down half the time, but they loved that Pinto. It was so sporty. And then she started to realize, she said, I'm realizing as I'm telling you these stories, how much my grandmother loved me too, unconditionally.
Good. So it's really bringing it into the moment. And into her body.
Yeah. And she would just pause, and she said, I said, just take that in. I stopped. I said, let's pause. And I just want you to really take that in, what you're feeling now.
Yeah.
Give them space to really feel it, and stop talking for a minute so they can do it. And I saw her just breathing in. And she starts just smiling. And she says, what's coming to me is that Pinto can be my symbol for this. Like that.
Wow.
Even when you feel broken down.
Wow. Great.
It's still worth it. She said that Pinto is probably still running somewhere. It's probably somebody's probably picked it up at a junkyard. But there were so many layers to the metaphor for her. And she had a tangible thing that she could, either that memory of her grandmother, even the Pinto car, that she started using to remind herself of unconditional love in spite of, the annoyances or the sad times.
Yeah. Well, things that maybe we should notice is that first you you met her where she was at. You didn't jump into denying what was going on for her,
Yeah.
but you empathized with it and reflected back to her, that you really understood where she was.
Mhm.
And then you gradually began to shift it to, what can you remember that, was maybe different from that.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Pinto, fits into what you were saying earlier about having imagery. And I know from hypnosis as well that having an image like that can be useful later in therapy. I mean, you can ask her to go to that Pinto space,
Yes.
for example,
Yes.
and that's something that can be used.
Yes. And we did. We used it a
Yeah.
lot.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Uh-huh.
Yeah. She would,
Yeah.
it was a good anchor for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Anchor. That's another interesting conception. Comes from NLP, as I recall. They talked about anchoring a lot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it amazes me when you elicit the client's image. Like we could come up with an image. Like we would
Uh-huh.
say, oh, think about a tree who's been through a lot of storms. And, but when they pull it from their experience, is so much more meaningful. So when I'm utilizing imagery, I might give a prompt or a suggestion, but I invite them to tell me what comes to mind for you that might
Yeah.
represent what
Yeah.
you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Um, One of the things that I think we've already covered here that we wanted to talk about was how to help someone access a positive emotional state without minimizing their pain. But
Yeah.
I think your story kind of illustrates that about how you might go about that.
Yeah. I want to give your listeners a little language structure that I learned that helped me with that. And again,
Uh-huh. Good.
some of this is what I learned through hypnosis training, but not all of it, but you validate. There's, I call it a tune, lift, and lead. So it's if I just
Say that
remember that,
again. Attune,
a tune, lift,
lift,
and lead.
and lead. Okay.
And if I just remember that phrase in my mind as I'm listening to a client, that first I want to attune with their experience, validate it, demonstrate my understanding and
Mm-hmm.
compassion for it. And then, so an example would be someone's been dealing with panic attacks. So instead of I may want to get more information. I've had panic attacks and I might say to a client, I know how I experience them, but how do you experience them? What happens for you? And so I might
Yeah.
want to get their full description so I really understand it and what they think may trigger it. But then when then I want to move into what can we do about it. So what I learned in hypnosis is it's called the has been tense change, where you say, so you've been struggling with all of these feelings of anxiety and panic, and that has made you not feel comfortable leaving your house. And then I want to lift by acknowledging a strength that I see. So I might say, like, if we were seeing someone in person or even virtually, I could say, so I'm so glad you made it here today. That's to your credit. And what you'd really like, so to lead into the desired response, I say, and what you'd really like is to develop more skills for feeling more strong, calm, and secure within your body so that anxiety doesn't show up like that anymore.
That's really a nice transition. I like that.
Yeah.
To start with what they've got and then lead them to where they'd like to go, where they'd like to be.
Yes. And it takes some practice. So I just want to reassure people that aren't used to doing it. In the beginning, it takes some practice because we're so well taught on how to attune and be right there with someone. But you've probably all had the experience yourselves that sometimes you get so attuned, like you think, oh my gosh, I'm feeling overwhelmed and hopeless too. I don't know what to tell this person. This is awful. So it's training your mind or your ear to be having one part of you tuned into that while another part of you standing kind of outside, thinking about what you're noticing. So the way I started getting is at the same time I'd be saying, yes, this is happening. And it's amazing. They're still sitting here. They're alive. They're competent. Wow. They're creative. I'm hearing signs of resourcefulness. So you've got to notice both. And that is what helps me get the lead statement is I might say, wow, I'm hearing how during COVID and you've had these, there's been job loss, there's been loss of friends, there's been this worry about the future. And yet I'm hearing all these ways that you've been so resourceful. And it sounds to me like what you really want is to find a way to make sense of what's been happening and believe that it's possible you can use that resourcefulness to survive this thing and maybe even open up new opportunities for yourself.
Yeah. Now, I bet you've done this so much in therapy that you probably do it with yourself.
I do.
Automatically in your head with some of your own issues in your own life.
I do. And it's been so helpful. I mean, because I wasn't like that all the time, and I just want to tell you, I really had to train myself to think this way.
Yeah.
To be able to hold both emotional states at the same time, to be able to acknowledge both can exist.
Yeah. I think that's important. So that underscores a couple of things for me. One is the value of probably supervision and workshopping things, like being in that hypnosis training sounds like it made a big impact on your life and your therapeutic practice, and helped you to learn to monitor, to have other people catch you doing the thing, right?
Yeah, that's right. You are exactly right. What really helped me is practicing with other people in trainings and
yeah, that's good. And you talked about holding both, and for me, that's an important Jungian concept that I value, which is we tend to want it to be either or. We tend to want it to be, to be all about the good stuff, none of the bad stuff. But the reality is, bringing it back to the situation that we're in right now, of the planet is under threat,
right?
And we need to find joy. So those sound so opposite.
Yes.
But somehow our mental health, I think, demands enough flexibility and to move into our larger perspective to somehow hold both.
That's right, David. That is so insightful. I hadn't thought of it on that level, but you're so right, because it's hard. I mean, I struggle with it like all of us, that sometimes I get really discouraged. Like, my goodness, how did we get in such a mess? And how are we going to fix this? And I wanted to say something about Barbara Fredrickson. Hang on, let me look at my notes. I've got it here. What she noticed is that when we can let ourselves feel a positive emotion, it opens up expansive, exploratory, and novel behavior. So she says, emotions prepare the body for an action. That's their purpose, is to prepare. All emotion is a request for an action.
Yeah, that's interesting, because the word motion is in there, in the word emotion.
Yeah. So I did teach this to my clients, before I started incorporating more of these positive emotion principles, but I would teach them I would teach them the emotion serves a purpose. Anger is to get you to, you'll notice energy goes to the upper body to protect, to push away. And so when you feel anger, it's your body saying, hey, I need to guard against something. But how can we use that in a way that isn't going to create more problems for you,
Yeah.
And then fear, you'll notice energy goes to legs. Your legs get shaky. You may empty bowel and bladder. It's because your body's wanting to mobilize you to run away from something. And my clients have found that really helpful to make sense of what's happening in their body. And another story I was going to share with you in terms of eliciting a positive emotion is sometimes I'll use movement, like with a client of mine who came in. She had been drugged, kidnapped, and raped. It was
Oh my God.
horrible situation. And she had already seen several therapists and psychiatrists. And her mother, actually, they lived in a different state from me in Tennessee, but her mother heard me on a podcast that may have been yours and thought, she sounds like she might offer something different. And so this woman's sister lived here in Chattanooga, ironically. So she brought her daughter down. She's like, why don't you see this therapist in Chattanooga? Well, I'm going to admit to everybody, I told them, I said, yes, I specialize in trauma. I'm happy to help, but I don't know that I can fix this in a few sessions. This is serious. So I wanted to keep their expectations realistic. At any rate, daughter, I'll call her Monique, client comes in. She's in a full-fledged panic attack when she comes into my waiting room because she's thinking I'm going to have to talk about this trauma yet again. And so I'd use that same attune, lift, and lead language. I said, oh my goodness, I know that must be really scary for you. And what you'd really like is to feel like you can settle things down. Well, what I know about anxiety is your body wants to move. That, come into therapy to talk about this trauma is scary. And your body's saying, get out of there. Why do you want to go visit the worst day of your life again? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
Let's walk outside and see if that doesn't help. Do you feel able to walk? Are you dizzy? She goes, no, let's get outside, because I feel like I can't breathe. So we just started walking together on the trail. I happen to have a little.
Yeah, that's so great because you're opening it up.
Yes.
Already, by getting out of the confined space of your office.
Yes.
So it seems like the timing of that was perfect.
It was. And, honestly, it wasn't like at the moment, I didn't feel like a brilliant therapist. I just felt like, oh gosh, I know the body responds better to movement sometimes when you're anxious. And I could see like she didn't want to be there. So let's get outside. I want to get it out of the therapy context. And as we were walking, I started talking to her about, what? I want to talk about everything but the trauma today. Like, I want to get to know you. That was one part of your life, but what were you like before that? What'd you like to do? What's your favorite pizza? Let's make it real light. And so she said,
she must
to
have
me,
loosened up just tremendously.
She did. And so it can be that simple, David. Like, we don't have to think of some clever, profound thing. It can just be the simple shift into something less threatening.
Wow.
And she told me later that we did, some other trauma work and I found there was one session in particular that I thought she would tell me was probably the best session because I, as the therapist, thought, wow, she made some big progress. So, when we were ending therapy, I asked her what stood out for you? What was the most helpful for you? And she said, you just get me out to walk the first day. She said, honestly, that's the best thing we did.
Wow. Not all your other fancy techniques and so on.
None of that. She
your
said,
theoretical constructs about what you're supposed to do.
She said, for the first time, I thought, wait, if I can walk on the trail and talk about pizza, I'm not broken.
Yeah.
I must be like, there's still a part of me that's still like, okay. And it gave me the confidence that I was going to be able to heal through this. And, you know, and the
I'm
fact that,
so glad you shared that story. It's a wonderful story.
yeah.
Yeah.
And not that that would work with everybody, but I want to invite people to think about there's subtle ways we can shift the emotional state or what the client's focusing on that can bring them into a new experience of themselves.
You mentioned music as something that you rely on for that too. And I wonder, well, how would you use music in a session, or would you?
Oh my gosh, I love using music. And I'm not a music therapist, if you know, so I don't have a huge repertoire, but honestly, playlists, just getting clients to make playlists has been one of the most fascinating therapeutic things I've encountered. And it came about a little bit accidentally when I had a client that it just came to this person like, you know what, I decided to make this playlist because it seemed to help me put my emotions into words. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. So I used it a lot for grief. So when someone's grieving a relationship, I found that the music has really helped them articulate their feelings. But I'm also going to share a story with you about another trauma survivor. So when I use it the way I usually present it to a client is, do you have some music that you've listened to that's helped you with this situation? Or have you found music helpful for anything? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh yeah. And they already have some songs. And so I invite them to tell me about the songs. A lot of times people now have the songs on their phone or, can find them for me. And I want to hear it with them. So you just sitting and listening to like a song that has meaning for them is such a beautiful experience. It helps strengthen the therapeutic alliance as well as gives you so much insight into their experience. And it really helps the client feel like they can articulate what's really going on at the deepest level.
I think that's such a great idea because it's interesting that it utilizes this technology that we all have now. Just pretty much everybody, as you say, is going to have some kind of a smartphone and probably have music on it.
Yeah.
And, I've been in workshops where music was played to evoke a emotional experience of one sort or another. For example, shamanic kind of training with drumming in the background, or workshops that I've co-led with a former student of mine who's a very successful therapist and workshop leader, and put on music as a way to induce a certain kind of mood. Even when I was in LifeSpring, which years ago, which was like the EST thing, it was one of those spinoffs, bring in 300 people for a weekend experience. They would use music to move people into a certain kind of emotional space.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never occurred to me to use it as a tool in a one-on-one kind of circumstance. I don't want to cut you off. I'm just trying to share my appreciation and excitement for what you're doing.
No, I like actually that you're bringing that experience that you've had in, because a lot of you are going to be listening to this and realizing, oh, wow, ancient cultures have known about these things for years.
Right.
And shamanic practice. I mean, what do they use? Imagery, music, movement to move someone into a different state.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also a communal kind of setting, which we could generalize to group therapy, I suppose, that there, that's a powerful influence. Or you think of something like AA, which is in a kind of communal and accountability kind of context,
So
and
much so.
support and accountability.
Oh my gosh, you're right. And one of the, oh gosh, his name's leaving me. He wrote the book, This Is Your Brain on Music. But he talks about music was meant to be experienced with others in community, to sing together. And it's only in recent years that it's more of an isolated, we have our earbuds in and it's actually meant to be a shared experience.
Well,
And
actually, I'm an old folkie, right?
yeah.
Not FOGGIE, but
No, folk.
yeah, FOLKIE.
Yeah.
I was part of that folk music revolution that happened in the 60s, and it's still going on, but a lot more underground, and a lot of it has transmuted into the singer-songwriter genre.
Right.
And the emo singer-songwriter of people who are getting into their emotions, trying to work out life issues and so on.
Yeah. And you know what?
I get excited about just thinking about all this stuff because I'm still listening to that music. And to me, yes, the joy of that period was that a lot of people knew the same songs.
Yes.
Because in our American history, before radio, people knew the same songs. They kind of grew up in a community where they had, quotes, folk songs.
Yes.
And there is something different about being able to, instead of the sage on the stage, the performer, something that we are producing, all doing together and participating in.
It's true.
And I was doing that into my early professorhood, faculty parties, and that was still alive. And we were young enough still to get loose and have some of those kinds of experiences and break out a guitar and sing and so on. Then as we got older, and the culture was moving away too, that kind of drifted away, sadly. But I'm still there in some ways. I'm still stuck in that place.
I'm glad you are, because I think we need to bring that back into therapy. And that's what I love about listening to your podcast, because you interview so many people that talk about experiential encounters,
thank you.
And I think that's so much of what therapy in the 70s with encounter groups and whatnot. I mean, I think there's a place for cognitive behavioral therapy, but I feel like we have to combine it with a real experience to take people into that next level of growth or healing or connection.
Yeah, I agree. I think so too. And it's great to see that elaboration coming into therapy from a number of different angles, different approaches, but it seems like the importance of emotion and that part of the brain is really coming into therapeutic awareness now.
Yeah.
And people looking for and inventing techniques to move people into that kind of a space.
That's right. That's right. And I really think, even though virtual therapy may be here to stay for, we may find ourselves doing it more than we ever did, even when the pandemic is under control enough for us to go back into our offices more regularly. I still think what this pandemic has brought our awareness to is the value of connection, and that to me is another way of experiencing positive emotion. It's feeling less alone, feeling connected, feeling with another human being.
But even though, and I'm talking to a lot of people who've gone virtual in their therapeutic practice, and they say, yeah, it's good, it's working, and what I'm experiencing right now in our interaction and me going back to some of my memories and so on, as I'm experiencing feelings as we're talking here.
Yeah.
So it's not just two talking heads.
Right.
Yeah, I feel connection because you understand what I'm talking about. And I think
Yeah.
I understand what you're talking about. And so it kind
Yeah.
of moves us into that space.
That's right. Exactly. And I think that's what can happen in therapy when we're talking about these shared experiences or memories. It moves us into that space. And then that, we're going beyond just the superficial conversation about
Yeah.
what's going on into.
Yeah. There's Zoom things that I sometimes have participated in where it really just is talking heads and it's not talking hearts.
Oh, what a great way to put that, Dave. I
It
like
just, oops, it just came out. Yeah, I hadn't used that expression before, but that might be worth writing down.
I
Maybe
know
I'll do that.
that's a good one.
Yeah, yeah,
And that is a great illustration of what Barbara Fredrickson is talking about when we start moving into that space of tapping into those emotional experiences
yeah,
that not positive, like happy go lucky, but your mind it stimulates creativity. It stimulates an aha moment. It stimulates, oh, I never thought about putting these two things together.
yeah,
But
yeah,
so you just demonstrated what often will happen when when we invite them to go into a different emotional state or experience that's less intensely painful. They start to come up with new ways of looking and even solutions.
I'm aware that as I was talking about the folk music and getting into that space, my body's moving a lot. I'm sort of bobbing around in my
Yeah.
chair here,
Yeah.
so that there's some movement involved with that. And
Yeah.
I'm going to share another. One of my sons has gone through some heavy duty medical stuff. Adult son,
Oh.
and one of the things that they did, he had a chronic pain situation, and they put him on ketamine, and it
Mm.
was a ketamine infusion, 24 hours, a 24-hour drip of ketamine. And one of the things that he did that never would have occurred to me is he reached out to family and friends all over the place um, for mixtapes. He wanted them to make mixtapes for him.
Wow.
Yeah, and it turned out it was really therapeutic for him,
I'll
and
bet.
he got very high. Don't know how much of that was the ketamine, how much of it was the music, but he just got into this very loving space and asking for support from his networks, and he
Mm.
came through it, with a lot of healing. I would say from a very difficult, painful place that he had been in, very stuck place. It really
Yeah.
helped him to get really unstuck.
Oh my gosh, that's an amazing story. A great, beautiful example.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, because again, I think that music helps us feel that connection and that love and that, and I think that buoys us, bolsters us
Yeah, right.
to feel like even though we're facing these threats in our world right now together, we're still, like to feel like, okay, but there's a group of us still
Yeah.
that are moving things forward, trying to bring positive and good into the world. And
I think that's so encouraging. And I've talked about that in other interviews, that it's amazing the creativity that's coming forth from individuals and groups of people who are doing things to encourage positivity, help people experience their own creativity and so on. I'm just blown away, people getting out and making music for each other on their front porches without having to get close to each other if you live in the right kind of neighborhood for that.
it's
And
true.
our various art things that people have done. And we've got grandkids who are not able to be in school, but the teachers have done drive-bys and come by in their car and kind of wave, or they've got signs to hold up. That sort of thing, there's just these, it says something good about the human spirit.
It sure does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And we think about that. I mean, when people are calling you for therapy, they want therapy, but think about that, like how much more helpful it is to see your teacher drive by and wave and know she's thinking about you than if she came to your front porch and said, "Now tell me about your feelings about this pandemic."
Yeah.
But to invite another way of eliciting connection and reassurance and support.
Yeah, one of my daughter-in-laws, I got 6 grandkids now and a 7th on the way. So that's why I'm kind of going to these grandparent type things.
Yes, well, it's amazing.
So how old would this be for her birthday that she just had? It's hard to keep track of when you have this many grandkids, of everybody's ages plus your own kids' ages. But the mother decided, okay, we're going to have a drive-by birthday party. And so they wanted to use our front yard because we live kind of on a court so that people could come in a circle like that. And so family and various friends and friends of family did slow drive-bys. The birthday girl was on the court and she had on kind of a costume and had made some displays, and people would drive by and they'd hand her gifts, and she had a wonderful birthday party.
Yes. Yes.
Even though everybody had masks and so on.
Right.
Yeah.
But we find a way to affirm.
Yeah.
One of my other favorite books, and it's not written by a therapist, but this book called Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. And what she says in it is, she said,
Great
she
title.
struggled a lot with depression and anxiety and on psych meds and everything. But she said she was so mad at her depression one day, like showing up again, that she said, "You know what? I am going to be furiously happy to spite it, to say, damn you, depression. I'm going to go out of my way to do crazy, fun things and, just to spite you." So when I'm introducing some kind of inviting a client to begin to let themselves notice things where they might feel gratitude or appreciation or love or comfort, I tell them it's not to minimize your feelings. It's to counter them. It's to claim your power back.
Yes.
That even though this is happening, I'm going to intentionally acknowledge this so this thing won't defeat me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think music tapes so often have been used as a form of courtship, right?
Yeah.
Where people make a playlist for the person that they're hoping to seduce or get a relationship with or whatever. And probably we all could benefit from making playlists for ourselves. I'm saying this probably because I don't do it. This is probably more a message to myself. But the idea of giving yourself a Valentine, give yourself a playlist.
Yes, I love that idea.
Yeah.
And the formula I'll share with people that I use is, 5 or 6 songs is usually, but it may be more, it may be less. It's whatever feels right for you. But I usually invite them, include one song that validates the negative feeling you've been struggling with. So for my clients that have grief, we want at least 1 or 2 songs that validate the despair that you've been feeling and the pain, because what some of the studies have shown is that even a sad song is soothing. Someone feels, I'm less alone. Somebody gets me. And that's what one of my clients told me when he said, like, he was having trouble. His son died and he was having trouble feeling anything. He was just numb. And he came into a session. He said, well, I finally started crying and now I can't stop. And he said, you know what did it? He said, the song from Les Miserables, Life Has Killed the Dream I Dreamed. And I forgot the name of that song. I don't know if that's it or not. I should have prepared that before I got on here, but he said it. He said, you know, even though it's caused me to be so sad, Courtney, it's like I feel like somebody in the world gets me, and that it perfectly captures the pain I've been feeling.
Wow.
And I said, I'm so glad that you found that song and it's opened this up. And then I said, so we could use a playlist where you have that song, but we also want to include some songs that reconnect you to your son. Like, is there a song we could pick that would represent like when you felt really close to him, or a song that reminds you of when he was born, or some happy memories too? And how, even though I get the pain, I mean, we had already done a lot of processing on the grief. I wouldn't do this like the first session with somebody, but we had been going around and around his pain, and I was trying to figure out a way to help him start finding a way to, I said, what I want you to be thinking about is what would help you also feel that you still have a connection with him, because grief is about feeling like they're not accessible to you. And even though he's not physically present, his essence isn't dead. And how come? And so he ran with that, and he picked Cat Stevens' Father and Son was one of his songs. He picked a song by Imagine Dragons that was one of his son's favorite songs. He picked some Grateful Dead songs because that reminded him of when his son was a baby. You know, he started finding all these songs that were helping him celebrate the life of his son, because his son died from an overdose. So instead of focusing on this tragedy, it was also like, you know, but his life still had meaning. And this is what I want to take
you
from
listen
it.
to the playlist with him?
I did.
With your client? Yeah.
I think that is crucial to be able to let them share that if they want to, and they usually do.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. And I mean, it brought a tear to my eye too.
I was just going to ask you if you get moved.
I do.
I was imagining that would be what would happen. Yeah.
You know, and I told him, I said, I'm sorry, I'm getting choked up. And he goes, no, it makes me feel more connected.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
if
really
I just
glad.
Lost it, and you know,
Yeah.
but I think just to see some emotion on my face too, that's attunement, you know, that you're attuning. Yeah.
Boy, I really appreciate that we got into this music part here towards the end, and I feel very attuned with you and this experience that we've had. And is there anything else that maybe you wanted to say before we wrap things up?
I think for your listeners, the way that I got better at incorporating this is I just got better about validating what was happening with the client, and then saying, gosh, how would you like to feel? What do you want instead? What do you wish you could access within yourself to get through this? I would just start asking them those kinds of questions, and they know, and they'll tell you.
Wow.
If they don't know, then I have found it's okay for you to say, well, here's what I'm wishing for you. Like, I care about you, and here's what I wish you could tap into. Does that resonate? And sometimes if you just share your thought, it's a prompt. Like, they'll say, well, it's not really that, but this. So I just think once you open that door, it shifts the tone of the therapy, and it helps them be more curious about, let's move in that direction. What can we do to get more of that?
Yeah. Well, Courtney Armstrong, you are a delight, and I want to thank you for being my guest again. Probably
Thank
not the last time on Sugar Rap Radio.
Thank you so much. I wish we had more time because I would love to interview you about drumming and what you experienced and how that, like you brought up some things like, oh, I want to start asking him questions.